Hello, hello, and welcome to my completely offline art video that may never be uploaded. I have no idea. I have had no internet at all for the past week or so. Yes, the past week. So as a result, I can't upload. I can't really do anything that isn't related to me typing something arduously on a cell phone, which is hard for me since, I'm an old man. And I don't understand such things. They are far too complicated for my small Stegosaurus brain. So as a result, I've decided to do this particular format of video, in which something I used to do, I haven't done in a while, is actually do part of it live, and it won't be too long, because I do have other things that I can be doing. So in this case, I've decided to draw I was going through characters that I could draw, and one of those that popped in my head was the character of Taokaka, I think is her name, from... Where's she from? BlazBlue, or whatever it's called. I don't know. It's one of those characters where I don't know anything about the actual character at all, and it does not matter to me. But I still like the general art direction, and I enjoy how fun her character design happens to be. And of course, Catgirl, so it fits in with the theming, doesn't it? So I decided to draw that character, and because it was that character and I have nothing to say about the universe or the games or anything other than the design itself, I figured, well, this would be a good opportunity to use this as a baseline for doing this sort of video. Alright, so the thing that I mainly wanted to talk about was how I go about drafting characters, and of course I'm not like the greatest art expert that ever lived or anything, but I'm just mainly just showing you how I go about thinking about how I draft my drawings. In this case, I'm doing a 1080 by 1920, which in other words, that's like formatted resolution for a cell phone. I've been doing that more recently. It's basically the same thing as desktop wallpaper, except the resolution is flipped from 1920 1080 to, you get the idea. And currently I am working at a resolution of 3330 by 5920. So whenever I choose to export it, I might drop it back down to 1080 by 19, and you can tell I can just change that 1 to a 5. That's all I did. And it retains the same aspect, so whenever I squash it back down, then it won't lose any resolution, obviously, because we are working in raster as opposed to vector. Now, if you don't understand any of that, don't worry about it. Just remember, it's better to work big and then shrink down. Alright, so drafting phase. Right now, I don't have any reference material for what this character looks like beyond like 1 or 2 pictures that I had just lying around that I think one of them was like her in the background of a scene in some unrelated video or inside of a group image of some characters standing together or something like that. And yeah, there it is. Okay. So I have a general idea of what she looks like, but I'm going to be doing some guesswork because no internet. So, as far as drafting goes, I have a general pose that I have in my head. And this is probably the biggest problem for a lot of people, is just trying to figure out how do I get the thing in my head down on paper. And of course, the first thing you want to do is to just work with some very basic shapes. And the thing that I would say first is the thing that I'll probably sing a lot during this video, if I can manage to keep my head on straight, is to draw what you are sure you want to be there. That's not the best phrase, is it? It's not draw what you know. It's draw what you're sure of, I guess. Draw what you are certain of is probably more accurate, because certainty is not the same thing as knowing. You can be certain of something and actually be wrong. Which is actually a theme in my old book I never published. I actually had a god of certainty that was meant to represent the failings of people in politics and science and things like that, things that they would consider to be absolutes when in fact they can be just as faith-based as faith itself. But that's neither here nor there. So already I've sort of made some mistakes and made some successes. You see the general idea of what I'm going with, is I sort of start out in the same way that someone molding clay would start out, is that you try to make something into a sort of blob that sort of resembles the shape that you're going for. And just to render example, feel free to delete it, it doesn't really matter. I didn't really like that one anyways. But the general idea is to try to place things in a way, like say, I know the top of the head is going to be up here, and I know that I'm going to want to frame this in sort of a 3/4 pose. In other words, not the whole body, like that would be 4 out of 4. So probably down to about the knees or a little above that. A half shot probably be like up to about the stomach, I guess. 1/4, it'd be like a bust shot. The head only, that sort of thing. You get the idea. So I know that I want the top of the head to be somewhere around here, and just to give an example, I'll just draw a line. Like, top of the head is somewhere around here. And let's say that the waist is going to be around here. And I'm drawing the circle to this, where the crotch is, basically. And so as a result of that area, that shape, that triangular shape of where the pelvis is furrowing, I know that I want it to occupy like this amount of space, probably. So the hips are probably going to be somewhere around here. So I'll just draw those 2 little lines there. And as a result, I know that I want the legs to sort of take this shape. So I'll just put these lines here. And I'm not saying that's where they absolutely have to be, but I'm pretty sure that they are going to be in that area, as far as me constructing the model goes. And let's work our way up. I'm just going to draw a central line. It's usually a good idea to draw a line that will show your line of action, as it's called. That is how you want the body to curve. And always flip that canvas. You can see I'm already sort of working at a slight... Especially whenever you're drawing something that's straight on, like I'm doing here. It's very, very easy to accidentally skew your image one way or the other. And it gets really hard to correct it over time, so it's important to get your drafts correct. So I'm just going to move things around and flip it back and forth and see what it looks like. Make her dance. So the torso is probably going to be somewhere around here. And I can tell already I'm going to have to do some shrinking as far as this goes. And our top of the head was supposed to be around here, but you can tell that's not going to work out. But I'm just going to put like a little orb here. Going to draw my central line. Put my little eye line here, because her eyes are going to be somewhere in this region. It doesn't really matter too much. So her neck, I know, because the head is going to be here, her neck absolutely has to be here. And it's already, you can see, squashing into the torso. So we know that's not right. So let's move the head up, because we have a little bit of space to work with, but not too much. And I know that this is going to be sort of the general proportion of what her torso is supposed to look like. So we want to keep that. We can't like chop off parts of her torso. Let's shrink it down a little bit. That looks a bit more correct, right? So let's go ahead and try to furrow out what will be her shoulders one day. Somewhere around here, even though her outfit doesn't really show much of her shoulders or anything really, which I'll fix that. But it doesn't show too much, so we don't have to really worry about it. But getting the actual construction of what the character looks like under their clothing is also important, just so that you know what you're constructing. So the arms will not be terribly important, as far as unless it's something that is really essential to the composition that you're creating. I want her sort of arm to be up here, I guess, because she has one of the things that I like about her design, and you can tell I'm already running out of room here. One of the things I like about her design is the fact that she has those big claw sort of sleeves, which they are sleeves. Her arms aren't actually that big. I know her claws are somewhere around here, so it'll be something like this. It won't look like that exactly, but it's somewhere around there. And let's say that the line for her chest would be like here, undercarriage right there. So it's going to be somewhere in this region. And I already want there to be more movement as far as the way that she's positioning herself, but that's really not that important right now. So let's create some lines. The upper arm and the lower arm are divided around the same point that the rib cage ends. So if this is like her collarbone, we have like the sternum here. The rib cage would be like right around here. So this being positioned right here is exactly where we want it. And the same is true for the wrist and the crotch, actually. the wrist will typically be in the same sort of position as the crotch happens to be, if the arms are actually lax to one side anyways. So putting the hands somewhere around here makes sense. So that's where we want things in general. So right now we have a very, very loosely constructed model. And like I said before, I tried to draw things in positions where I know they have to be. Because the way that I draw things is that I typically don't use much of a reference, so I'm doing a lot of guesswork. But I know the rules to how anatomy generally works, and since I draw in a more cartoony style, I'm not too concerned about it. I'm not going to draw anything realistic. But because I know those general rules, I can position things correctly in a way that I can sort of work around them and draw on top of them. So now we have all that. Now that we've done that and drawn something that is pretty crummy looking, but does have a sort of general structure to it, we can, if we want to, work on top of it and just keep going. Or we can do what I'm doing here and just lower the opacity and keep going about it this way. The way that painters work is they will do something very similar to this, but they'll work on one layer sometimes, which I think is absolutely insane. I do not work that way. Personally, I think it's sort of witchcraft, what they do. But they will often do this exact thing and just keep working on the same image over and over and over again, and just shifting and moving things around until it just so happens to work. And it is very difficult, and I have a great amount of respect for anyone that chooses to work that way. I won't do that, because I think that is nuts. Now, especially if you're a guy drawing women, you can sometimes make little mistakes like trying to, let me do this example. You can make little mistakes like trying to draw like the torso here and then draw the body going down here, and then you'll put like a big waist like right here, which everyone's body type is slightly different. Because you're used to like looking in a mirror and thinking of the torso in terms of long like male torso followed by, you know, that furrow and, you know, belly button right here, and you're thinking of hips in those terms. But of course the female body typically, again, everyone's body is different, so you can have a body that doesn't do this if you're a woman, of course. Typically the hips might start a little bit higher up, and even if it's not like, it's obviously the hip bone isn't like up here or anything, but you can exaggerate and have the body sort of furrow out a little bit more, higher up. If you're a guy and you ever have seen like women's jeans and it has occurred to you, wow, they pull up their jeans really high. They have to. That's like a thing. It's how their bodies work. So it's one of those things where like the reverse is also true for women, I guess. If you're a female artist and you're drawing the male form, you might accidentally do the same thing, where you don't really think about the male body in terms of how it's functioning. And of course, I'm operating in a male body, so even though I draw a lot of women, I'm not necessarily studied in a way that someone would be if they're walking around in that body for their entire lives. So I will also make lots of mistakes. And it takes longer for me to draw a female form, perhaps, because I have to correct those mistakes. But there's nothing wrong with that. Every single drawing that I've ever done has always had mistakes in it. Every last one of them. Alright, so you'll see I'm flipping this particular canvas now. Not as many errors as I did on the first pass, because I'm going back over the one that I have done before. It doesn't look too bad. I can tell already, though, and by the way, I'm working in Paint Tool Sci 2. I always get this question on videos. You can look up here in the top corner and it tells you what program it is, so you don't even need to ask me, but people don't think about that when they're watching the video, and they ask anyways. But yeah, anyways. In Paint Tool Sci, you can select one layer and then click this little button on another layer that's underneath the little eye, which just turns the visibility on and off. And that just locks things together so that whenever you move them, it moves both those things at the same time. In Photoshop, it actually has a little bit more functionality as far as locking layers together, but I won't go into it. It's one of the things you can just play with and figure out on your own. But one thing I wanted to do actually is to shrink this down a little bit. One thing I'm sort of bad about is I will often work too large. What I should actually be doing is working as a very tiny thumbnail, like somewhere up here, and then getting the shape right, and then just blowing it up and then working over it. Because if you work in thumbnails, you don't find yourself trying to add details. Like here I'm drawing like a clavicle for no reason. Like I don't need that yet. Just because the picture is large enough that it sort of warrants my eye being drawn to that area. I don't need that yet. So if I was working via thumbnail, then I wouldn't have that issue at all. And again, like this will all be sleeve eventually, but just working with the actual body shape does help a little bit. So again, I might delete all this after I do the live portion of this, but just to give you an idea of what I'm thinking of, we'll go ahead and flesh this out some. The elbow, that doesn't look right. Let's flip this so I can see what I'm doing. I can tell with the position that I've drawn, and whenever you are drawing something, sometimes you have to work with what you're creating as opposed to what you planned. The thing that you have in your head will never ever be the thing that you end up drawing. It will always have some sort of minor difference. And for some people that's very frustrating. You have to get over that. You have to think in terms of what your possibilities are as opposed to the thing that you absolutely want. If you don't have leverage in terms of the things that you desire versus the things that you get, and this goes for anything in life, you will find yourself very deeply frustrated all the time. Because you will want one thing and then receive something else that's maybe not quite as good, or you're setting your expectations too high. Whereas if you simply set a general goal and then try to work towards it, and whenever you get the thing that you are able to produce, then you're not only not as upset, but the thing that you got is more realistic, so you're not trying to defeat your own expectations. So we have sort of, let's see, her little paws are kind of difficult, because I remember, I can't look this up, but I remember seeing a reference image of what she actually has under her sleeves. And I think she actually has normal people arms, even though she has these giant wavy, like cat paw sleeve arm things. And supposedly she's holding a big fish in both hands, and her big paws are just extended sleeves with nothing in them other than those big fish. I don't know if that was a fan creation or a joke or what's going on with that. Again, I don't know anything about the actual character, other than she is sort of a cat, but also she's not. And her quote-unquote species works slightly different. I don't know. I don't understand such things. But her arm, as a result, I know that her arm probably will go somewhere like up here, and her wrist will probably end up here. And like her hand will continue on. And you'll notice like here, I didn't actually bother drawing a hand. I'd sort of just sketched out. You'll probably notice that I do that a lot. I'll sort of make a bunch of sketch marks in the general area of something, and I won't bother erasing them. I'll leave them, but I'll just sort of keep an eye out for which one of these marks did I like the best. And then I'll identify, well, this one's probably the closest. And I'll start working back over it. I have talked before, and I'll go ahead and finish up this sleeve. It'll probably be somewhere around here, if I had to guess. Probably something like that. I'll correct that later, but I think it's somewhere around there. I've talked about this in the past, though. My perception that a lot of people that do single stroke methods of drawings, let's do a hood up here. She has her little hood. Tend to have learned digitally as opposed to traditionally, because they have the ability to control Z things. Whereas people that learn traditionally, drawing with a pencil, and they don't have the ability to undo anything, tend to learn to work up their drawings, like especially if you're doing something like drawing in charcoal. Like I learned traditionally, and then moved on to digital whenever I got older. Will tend to work up. Whenever you where traditionally you can't afford really major mistakes like this. So as a result, you sort of draw like this, someone that draws digitally, and I see a lot of younger people draw like this. They'll do this and be like, well, I don't like that line. They'll Control Z and then just do it again and do it again and do it again and do it again. They'll just keep doing that over and over and over again until they get this perfect, pristine, extremely clean, and potentially completely lifeless line that they have created. Not that that's really a criticism. I actually like the look of that, but it's something that is very distinct from what I do. So if you're aiming for one sort of drawing versus another, that's something to consider. One is not right and one is not wrong. Again, I like both those things, but always be aware of what you are doing. Like you can see me doing this here, where I'm sort of just placing line in a general area. The advantage of doing it this way is that, much like my advice on my general life advice of trying to approach things from a very general aspect and not being too enamored with the fictional best result that you're aiming for, the actual drafting process is very similar, because if you have very loose lines and you're sort of just drawing on top of them, like this ear isn't quite right, I think it's somewhere more around there, and if the line is too dramatically deep, then I'll get rid of it. This is one time I will do that. If that happens to be the case, then you have more leverage in terms of how your eye views the overall drawing. And that's something to also consider, because there's something called change blindness, I believe it's called. And it's a problem in drawing, because you will be drawing something, and the more that you work on it, the more that you become blind to the changes that you're creating in that drawing. But whenever you stop and then stop drawing for a while and come back to it later, then you will see the errors that you have been putting into it this entire time. Like, see here, well, it could be off to one side. I don't mind that. Let's try to, because I can always, I feel like it's better to try to make things center first, because if you try to make them center first, then at least you're not making mistakes in the drafting process and drawing around something that isn't centered. Because the more things that are centered in a draft like this anyways, the more likely you are to make things around it also proportionally correct. And you can always correct it later. But yeah, drawing these sort of quick, open lines like this that are just sort of sketchy, they don't have any real correctness to them, allows you to be able to work in a way that you don't have to worry too much about what you're putting down. So probably somewhere around there. And again, her paw is going to be somewhere up there. I'd like to get this away from her face so I can show off more of that hood. But that would probably mean moving sort of, her paw is going to be sort of like out here. And those claws will be like right around here. So the curve of that will come down to sort of this position. Her arm will be sort of out here. So I'll probably be further away from her body than I'm expecting it to be. Which means moving the whole thing over here. And she has sort of these weird little... She has hair. Of course I want to show off them hoo-has, right? Because we're drawing a perverse drawing. And this is very important. Again, I'm no Bob Ross. I will draw perverse drawings no matter what. You can't stop me. It will be done. I want to try to get her coat open. Normally, of course, she has this really long coat. These little things here, which I think are her hair. Her actual hair. Like, she has hair that sort of, you can barely see it almost sometimes. It, like, especially in the few times where it's sort of hinted that she's... Taokaka's actual model is of this weird orb face thing. It's like this black orb that has two big glowing red eyes, and then it has like a smiley face like this. And then it has the hood, and that's just what it looks like. it looks basically like this. And this is Taokaka. Like, this is what she normally looks like. I love that design, but I'm trying to make it somewhat more realistic, like faux realistic. So that means opening her hood up a little bit so it's not so constrained around that position. Giving her a little bit more of a jawline. But I actually don't want to lose too much of that aesthetic of her having that completely blacked out face. Not black face, but just having that look about her, because I think that's really cool looking. But I'll probably leave some like little bits of hair in there somewhere, and then black out everything else, which means that probably the inside of the hood will probably be really, really dark. And I'll probably have like some rim lighting or something to show that cheekbone. So that's something I'll probably leave as a little reminder for myself. And then I'll go ahead and block in the rest of it. Although I also need to like put in a little kitty mouth. Somewhere around there. It'll be somewhere in this general position. Again, I'm not going to draw the whole thing correctly. And normally I won't do any shading like this unless it's something that I really need to remember. So it'll look something like this in general. This will probably look dramatically different from, in the final product, but something like this. And again, hoo-has. Very important to have your hoo-has correct. I'm not gonna do the thing that I did in the Coco drawing and make them overly cartoonish looking, because they ended up working against me. And as I recall, she doesn't actually... I don't think she wears anything under the coat aside from suspenders. Yes, she wears suspenders and these little shorts that have like kitty paws that are like connected down here somewhere. And it's sort of like this is sort of the general shape of it. It's somewhere around here. So I'll probably have to use those as, that'll be her bra straps, I guess. And I'll have to probably make them a little bit larger than normal, just so I cover all those sinful bits that YouTube won't allow me to show. We won't want the children to see that, all the children watching this program. Isn't that correct? One mother that allows her children to watch this filth? What sort of mother are you? I know who you are. Samantha. I don't know. I was just taking a shot in the dark there. It's probably Samantha. I know your type. Alright, but this is sort of the general gist of things. Whenever I go back over this, I'm not going to commit to this. I need to remember some little lines so that I recall to add abs somewhere. And I wanted to work a little bit on my skin shading, which I'm not good at all. So I'll probably focus a little bit on that. I can already spot a lot of positional errors and things like that I'll be working on, but you get the idea. What you want to do is to try to, again, draw the things that you know. Like, this needs to be here and this needs to be here, and then you draw the things in between. It's sort of like animating. I've talked about this before, too. Whenever you're drawing, like, a bouncing ball, and you know that ball bounced like this, and you have to draw the in-between frames, I know this is down here. Let's actually... don't need to do this, but... it sort of flattens out, like it's not a perfect thing. Burring, there's a little bit of flatness because it hit itself. Gave it a little bit more personality. Sort of flattens out like that. Makes it all squishy. And since I know that's there, and I know this is here, then I'll just draw the thing that's in between. And I know it's going to go along this arc, so it's as simple as drawing something that preserves the motion that goes in the same direction, that interchanges between this shape and this shape. So you just draw whatever is in the middle, whatever makes the most sense. So as long as you are getting this correct, and this correct, then whatever is in the middle will probably be correct too. And that's the reason why I do a bunch of drafts of things. You'll watch me do, like, draft 1, which I know is sort of correct, but it's not all the way there. Then I'll do draft 2, which is sort of more correct, but still not all the way there. And then I'll work on top of this and do draft 3. Then I might do a draft 4 and a draft 5. It just kind of depends. And I might stop in between those because I start getting change blindness and I stop seeing the things that I need to correct. And eventually I'll get to the point where the draft looks exactly the way that I feel like it looks natural for the thing that I was aiming for. And then after that, I'll be able to stop and move on to the line and everything else. So you can see the advantage of working up on a drawing as opposed to trying to get a perfect line every time. I find that doing this perfect line method works really well if you're drawing a very cartoony look to something that doesn't have much detail and you know exactly what it's going to look like for the most part. Like Taokaka's original design is pretty good as far as this goes because she's basically just a diamond that has those 2 orbs in the middle and then it has a mouth. So you don't really have to worry too much about that. You don't have to do too many drafts to be able to get that sort of very cartoony look to things down correctly. So if you find yourself thinking, wow, I draw everything very cartoony and there's not much realism or depth to it or something like that, try doing it this way. Try working up on your image. Even whenever you're drawing in charcoal. Never... Like, it's very easy to try to, especially digitally, you can get away with this. If you're drawing a charcoal drawing, I'll just real fast. If you're drawing a charcoal drawing and you know there's a big sort of black area around here, and like you're drawing like an apple or something. My little crummy apple. You're drawing like an apple or something around this area, and it's like in a jar, let's say. And you know, well, I know that this area is very dark. Apple here. Do a little draft. Make a little love. Get down the night. Okay, so it's very easy to say, well, light area is right here, so I'll leave that blisteringly white. And dark area is up here, so I'll make this my absolute black. Like you'll scribble real hard. I'm gripping my pen in a fist right now. You can't see this. It's gotta get darker and darker and darker, and you just really just scrub it in there until it's completely black. And then you start noticing, well, there are little finer details in here. Like you can barely see stuff in the background. It gets really harder to take your eraser and start trying to erase all that material that you have put down on the page. You created a huge mess, and trying to lift all that material off of your canvas becomes an absolute nightmare. So that's the reason why you typically want to work up on your drawings. That is, start with your white canvas, assuming you're working with a white canvas. Batman the Animated Series, for example, famously, they drew on black paper because they found that it was much easier to just paint on top of that and go for the tonality they were for the series if they were starting black as opposed to starting on white canvas. But you start on your white canvas in this case, and then you work up. You try to work up to your grays, and you just keep fleshing things. Of course, I'm doing a binary pen, so you can't really... You work up to your grays. Sorry. I was trying to show this in the dumbest way possible. And then you sort of just keep going. You know, well, this is going to be here. This is going to be there. You know, there's going to be a big white spot right there, so I'll leave that. And you just keep trying to work up and make the areas that are darker slightly darker over and over and over again until eventually you get to the point where all the darks are as black as they can be and all the whites are as white as they can be, so you have the appropriate amount of contrast. Drawing a draft is very similar. You want to try to work up to the point where you have the things that you are certain are your metaphorical grays as correct as they can be. That way, whenever you have the appropriate amount of contrast in your model drawing, then you know that it is correct. And the same goes for like molding pottery or anything like that. You're trying to get a very basic shape and then work on shifting up the form that you're going for. Like if you're making a bowl, you're trying to make that bowl shape as close to a bowl shape as you can before you start trying to work on creating fine details. Because if you try to get something that's a wobbly mess and then start adding in like flowers and stuff on the side, and then try to make it into the perfect shape, you're going to ruin all those details in the process, and they won't mean anything. Always work up. Everything is incremental. Success is always incremental. Okay, so you get the idea. This has been draft stage 1 and 2. I hope you get the idea of how I do drafts. Now I will proceed with the rest of the drawing, which will probably be a time-lapse that happens almost instantly, because I have nothing to say about BlazBlue, or whatever. BlazBlue? Isn't it spelled BlazBlue, but it's actually pronounced... I don't know. I don't care about fighting games. But I like those cat girls. Anyways, take it away, future me. Haven't done that in a while. And I am back, I hope. Yes, there it goes. Okay. Wow, that looks like shit. This is future Eli, by the way. It's been a while since I've recorded. Opening up a Coke here. I was actually thinking before I got started recording this little bit that pulling these little... This is like one of those little miniature bottles of a 0-calorie... They don't call it Zero Coke or Coca-Cola Zero? Maybe this is Coca-Cola Zero. I don't know, but it's the one that doesn't make you quite as fat. That one, yeah. I was thinking whenever I was pulling one of these things off, that it's a lot like pulling corn off of a corn stalk. That's a farmer thing, I guess. You poor deluded fools will never know the joy of pulling corn off of a corn stalk. It's pretty satisfying in a way. It has nothing to do with this drawing, though. Alright. So, I don't know what the hell I was talking about last time. I finally got done with this goddamn drawing. Which I had plenty of time to do, since the internet still is down, so I'm still royally fucked. It's been a weird... I'm not going to bother describing the whole internet situation because it has been over a week now. And it just keeps happening. Apparently it has something to do with a combination of events of their router going down and the entire infrastructure of their network changing in combination with maybe the radio transmitter that is on the tower here at the house also not working. Whatever. Okay. But, ignoring that, there's a couple of times in the process of me doing this that I end up stopping the recording and then going, maybe I'll try doing this thing. And then I'll start doing something that ends up working and I didn't record it. So if you're wondering why one or two times something will sort of jump forward, like this lower part of the body I fix a few times, especially at the very end of the video, I jump forward a pretty large margin from what I finish with because I spent so much time doing little minor color adjustments. The video itself ends up clocking in at like 9.5 hours, I think. But I actually spent way more on it just because I spent so much time playing. Which I didn't want to record all that, so yeah. Okay, so as I promised, I have nothing to talk about in regards to Taokaka herself. Actually, I take that back. There's like one or two things that I sort of know about her. One of them is I remember trying to figure out, alright, has there ever actually been any depiction of her actual face? And it turns out, yeah, sort of there has been. I think it was mainly manga specific. And here I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what to do with her big meaty paw. Because I'm constrained by trying to draw this for cell phone resolution, so there's not much space to work with for the pose that I'm using here. So it takes me a while to figure this out. Just pretend that I knew exactly what it was that I wanted to do. This video is all about me explaining the process of trying to figure things out. Here, I guess that is a good example. With her paw, I was basically troubleshooting that for a long time. and then realized, maybe if I flip the arms, and mainly what you're trying to do is just trying to occupy space. And there's a few times, especially near the end, where I realized, well, this part of the frame is completely empty, and that's causing a lot of negative space that's pulling the appearance of the overall drawing to one side, so I add a little bit something there. I use her tail to sort of pull the weight of the image to one side. Yeah, you get the idea. Not really in the mood to talk about it anymore, since I've been thinking about it for the past 3 days. Trying to draw her grabbing a big meaty tit right there. This has been another case of me enjoying the primary stage of the drawing way more than the, especially the color stage of the drawing. Coloring and shading this ended up being a huge nightmare, which we'll get into later. But yeah, the drafting was way more fun, unfortunately. Or sort of fortunately. My strength has always been line drawing and drafting and things like that. Some people always said, no, your coloring is great. It isn't. My coloring is not good at all. I don't know what I'm doing most of the time in regards to shading things correctly. What I am good at is color selection, which is not the same thing. Like, I typically will select very good colors for the general tone that I'm going for. I usually, if you have not noticed, have a lot of warm color schemes that involve a lot of reds and purples and blues and oranges and a little bit of yellow. I very rarely use greens unless I am trying to accent something or make it stand out, which ended up posing a problem with this character because she's a fighting game character, so she has a limited palette, and not only that, because she is a fighting game character, she has a very character-specific palette because you need to be able to look at something and go, oh, that character. Like, even if you're just looking at a blob of nothing but the colors of her palette with no form or anything, you'd still be able to recognize her. And that's not great for fan art usually, because it means that fighting game characters tend to be one very simple range of colors, which can be really frustrating. With hers, yeah, obviously, browns, yellows, oranges, with some red accents. And that's it. That's all she is. Like, there's no sudden bursts of green or blue anywhere. So whenever you are coloring something, it has the unfortunate tendency to, especially if it isn't very simple colors, it tends to blend together really badly. I actually found I'm able to use my cell phone for internet. I found some of her original sprites, and I haven't forgotten about her face, don't worry. And I noticed with her shorts or panties or whatever you want to call those things, I don't know what she's wearing. It's a fashion faux pas, certainly. That the suspenders and her little short panty things are the same color. They're this sort of mid-saturation red. It doesn't drop down to being a brown or a pink or anything, so it's fairly high in saturation, but it's still not a pure red. And that color almost blends completely with her natural skin tone. It doesn't, but it gets very close. So even with that, you can almost barely tell that there's anything going on there. Not that you really ever see what's under her coat most of the time. But it's just another example of her colors being very, very close together. So attempting to... Like, if I had the power to just make her skin a different color, make her coat a different color, like just change everything about her in every way, then things would be way easier. But, yeah. Trying to work with it, but, you know. Alright, so anyways, yeah. You do see her face in the little manga pages a little bit from time to time, from what I could gather. There might have been... The last time I looked this up was years ago. But the last time, or something may have changed since then. I don't know. I really don't know. But for the time being, most of her appearance seems to be fan art. She's supposed to be some sort of... She's supposed to be some sort of a cat girl of some sort, of course. So she is technically a different species. And the males of her species apparently are like just giant house cats that stand on two legs. Because, yeah, why not? But the females all seem to be just, human women with Nico shit on them. So she does have a human face, from what I can gather. And just pretend there's nothing going on down there. I didn't draw anything just now. Don't worry about it. So that does come up later in the drawing. She's just a character I really don't know what to make out of in terms of... like, drawing her is kind of difficult. I talked about this before, but the fact that she has this completely oval face, which normally her hood is pulled so incredibly tight around what she looks like that you don't really have to worry about it, or they don't have to worry about it. But the moment that you start trying to make her hood look a little more realistic and fall like on the body as opposed to being a geometric shape, it becomes a nightmare because people's heads are not perfect orbs with a static expression pasted on top of it, which is what she is, so... Had to do some problem solving in regards to that. Oh, man. She was a little problem. She was a problem. Especially whenever the colors got thrown into the mix. Holy shit. I kind of surprised... I didn't remember whenever I first started doing this, playing back on this part. I didn't remember starting with the sketch that I ended my live bit with, and then immediately jumping into something more dramatic. I did not remember doing that. I should have done another primary, but I guess it ended up working out okay. Something that I was really trying to focus on with this drawing is... I'm doing the sort of final line work here, but I did not want to get rid of the primary layer, and I ended up not getting rid of it, of course. But I didn't preserve as much of that as I wanted to. Because my intent was to focus on the line work, and I did one of my Eliisms, one of my gripeisms. And in the color phase, I ended up overworking the color so much that it ended up obscuring too much of the original line work. And that was because I was trying to focus on making the lighting look dramatic. Which I don't need to stop doing it, I need to just focus on the merit of the individual image. Maybe, I don't know, maybe in the future I should just do a few line-only images. Which I keep telling myself to do that, but every time that I set out with the goal of doing it, I always get to this point where I'm like, I love the color on this one point, though. If I just add just a little bit of color, and then after I add the color of that one little section, I think, well, now it doesn't make any sense for the rest of it to not be colored. So I'll do some basic color on that, and then I'll say, it would look really nice, though, if it just had just this one little bit of, like, shading, and then that I'll just keep getting more and more greedy. It always happens. That happens every single time. But with this drawing, most of the success of it is in that primary stage, and that's pretty typical for me. I will often draw these nice-looking sketches that are good-looking on their merits, and as I work over it more and more, it starts losing that. And that's something that I've always struggled a little bit with. Sometimes I can preserve it. You can tell that's where I get my style from. It's because I always really like doing the primary stage. And I keep working that primary stage. And the more that I do it, the cleaner the line the cleaner the line work gets, and the more that the color obscures the original image. So as a result, as I keep pushing that, it makes me want to do the opposite. So over time, I've gotten more obsessed with this idea of trying to work up my line layers with a lot of sketching to build up form strength. So as a result, my drawings always have a lot of form to them, a lot of weight and energy to the geometry of how everything falls into place. Especially if it has big rockin' tits, right? So as a result of that, I've always had extremely strong line work that has much weaker colors. Or much weaker shading, I'll be more specific. Ideally, like the perfect drawing would... the perfect drawing for me would be if I did a full pass of primary line work and got that working exactly the way that I wanted it to be. Then I did my basic color zones, and then after that I handed off to someone that knows what the hell they're doing in regards to shading correctly. Like especially skin. I am so bad at shading skin. And part of that also is because I am trying to use line too much with skin, which you don't need to do. Especially if you're drawing skin, since skin is supposed to be really soft looking and has it doesn't have harsh folds in it most of the time. Like, if it's something like the undercarriage of a boob or whatever, sure, it does. But typically, skin is very, very subdued in terms of how it's formed. So the line work is causing a lot of that problem because I am putting so much emphasis, like, say, her abs. I'm putting so much emphasis on that, which I shouldn't be doing. That should be 100% being controlled with shading and color. But because I'm so focused on line work and I love doing line work, I can't resist doing that every single time. Because I don't have the confidence of saying, well, I'll just do that later. Because I never look forward to later because I'm not very good at it. Because I always end up having problems with it. So as a result, I always end up relying on my line work. But anyways, if I could do line work and then do my basic color passes and zone everything out, and then have someone else walk into the room and shade it for me, and then I do color correction and go back to my layers and say, okay, your shading looks good, but I want this to have slightly more purple in it, and I want this to be warmer looking, and I want this to be color adjusted from an orange over into a like an orange red, and just play with that for a while, because that's also one of my strengths, is choosing atmospheric colors. I am good at that. If I could do that, then it would end up being a perfect drawing. It's just the shading. It's always the shading with me. There was a video that I released on Android 21, I think, from Dragon Ball, where I very aggressively tried to paint it. And I did it with the intent of showing everyone, alright, this is what I can't do. I don't care how this turns out, I'm going to force myself to try to shade this in a way that I think I should be doing it, even though I know that I'm not going to succeed. And it ended up looking okay, but it's still very obvious what my limitations are. I end up creating this really overworked skin texture that it looks okay, but it has a lot of obvious problems with it. Whereas if you can see artists that, like, they don't have my strength in regards to creating form, but they are way better in terms of making things to make things look soft and appealing in terms of skin tone, especially. And I really wish I had that, but I'm just... so many things work against me. My strengths are actually working against me in that regard. Because I'm so strong in terms of form and line, it just... I'm fighting against myself. That is my consistent issue. Anyways, you can tell with the suspenders, you'll notice they're this dark color. Her actual, like I said before, her shorts and suspenders or whatever is going on down there are the same color of red. And I think they're the same color of red as like her eyes, and there might be like one other thing that's red. Ribbons, that's what it is. And that's because of restricted color palettes in the games that she's in, obviously. You can't use a bunch of diverse colors like you can with a drawing. Typically, you'll pick like 8 or so colors, something in that range that will represent a color or a character, and then you'll be working with those, and then that's it. That's all you do. Here's where the problems begin. Another thing that I do whenever I'm shading, I always focus so much on, like here, you can see me splitting up the... You can see me trying to create folds and things like that. Like, oh, well, of course the cloth would fold this way, which is more of a problem on the left side of the screen. Like, you can see it especially with near her shoulder and where her collar is meeting. That should just be one solid color. I should not be trying to create definition in that area of the drawing with a color pass like this. But it's one of those things, I can't resist doing it. So I end up always screwing over myself. If you can't tell, I was deeply frustrated coloring this particular picture. It ends up looking fine, I guess. But it is something that drove me absolutely crazy. And skin tone, always pay attention to your skin tones. Again, I am not really any good at this. Anytime that I watch someone else that really knows what they're doing, of course it doesn't help that you're starting with a brown skin. I've noticed that it's much easier. It looks easier. It looks easier, and it seems to be simpler to be able to shade skin if the skin is very, very light. Because then you typically will see artists create harsh lighting on one side that is completely blistering canvas white. Like there's no color there at all. And all the surrounding skin will be almost the exact same color. And you'll end up with these sort of ghost characters that have like almost no like a color to them whatsoever. It's kind of unusual. It works though, especially if you are surrounding all the if you're surrounding it with a bunch of other colors. With I'm silently evaluating my thought process. Coloring like that is a problem, though. Because if you do that, a lot of it is contrast. Like, say what I'm doing right here. I'm trying to create a lot of contrast and stark lighting. Which, it does end up looking okay, but I don't know if you can do that. The thing I was talking about with skin tones, trying to make the skin tones simple with more subdued texture or whatever to them. You can't really do that with this sort of lighting that I try to apply to everything. So I guess really the solution is much starker contrast. Like even more so than I'm doing now. Which is probably another issue that I have. Sorry for that space of me spacing out, but that's me. That's how I normally think. I'd kind of just sit here and consider things for long stretches. If in the course of shading this thing, I were to, say, take the entire left side of her body and completely black out the whole thing. To the point that it was almost pitch black. Like, you know that lighting pass that I did? Where one side of her body suddenly got really dark? If you're even paying attention. If that was entirely black, and the other side was almost entirely white, then you could do that. It wouldn't look exactly like that. Like, completely black on one side, completely white on one side. I'm exaggerating some. But then you could get away with that mid-tone being more subdued. And I think that's part of my problem, is I'm trying to have the best of both worlds. I'm trying to retain form. I'm trying to have high contrast, but I also want the subtlety of really nice looking skin tones, and I can't get that because I'm not working with the goals of the image. So I guess this is my lesson to you guys. If this has made any sense to you at all, me rambling about this, is whenever you are making something, like I think I said earlier in the live portion, is as you create a drawing, it's going to develop its own personality, it's going to develop its own identity. The thing that you originally wanted is not what it's going to end up being. So you have to look at what you're creating, and you get to that draft portion, and you think to yourself, I like this. This draft looks neat. I want to preserve this, and that's fine. But you also have to eye it. You have to eyeball the image and think to yourself, okay, once I start shading this thing or coloring this thing, what are its strengths going to end up being? Is this a posture that will be conducive to very strong lighting? And this one, it's not. If you're looking at something straight on, you can apply some really aggressive lighting to it, but it probably isn't a good idea. If you're doing that, probably it'd have to be like overhead lighting or underlighting or something like that, which probably wouldn't really look too good for this particular image, especially since I'm focusing so much on form and I'm wanting to highlight the form. So probably the actual thing is that this should have been an image that was entirely either line work with a little bit of color or something that you could say me trying to do here, and I end up fixing it. And here I'm adding a little bit of hatching. I realized, the form is not really, I'm not really getting enough of that form, especially on the skin anymore. So I ended up going back and doing some hatch work. And that does sort of give it a little bit more depth without relying on a skin tone. And I was trying to clean up the primary of the skin, because I had erased a bit of it, and I got tired of trying to smudge the lines into the negative space that I had accidentally created, even though you probably can't see too much of it. But I ended up, as a result of getting rid of that primary, I started getting rid of some of the accidental depth it was giving to the abs that made them look like they had any definition to them, which ended up screwing that up. So it's one of these problems with working with a bunch of layers. If you work with a ton of layers, you can end up having one layer that's way down that you completely forgot about be the thing that is accidentally making something look okay. Whereas if you were painting an image, you really don't have that issue exactly. Since you're controlling, since there's only one layer, you're essentially controlling every layer at the same time, so you don't have to worry about it. There are strengths and weaknesses to doing both those things. Again, if you can't tell, this has been a frustrating series of days. Especially since I have not had the ability to do anything except for either work or just meander around the house because of the internet issues. I can't upload anything either. I've been slowly, not losing my mind, but just getting really frustrated at small things. which is probably part of the reason why I ended up overworking so much of this image. And here I also have the same thought process, where I realized the image is getting really focused on detail, so it looks kind of strange for her face to have absolutely no detail whatsoever. But I also thought, well, that's the entire appeal of the character, is that it's very simplistic. And I thought, well, maybe if I have a little bit of the face showing through. So I ended up going through and doing an entire layer devoted to facial features, and even after the drawing is quote-unquote finished in this time-lapse, again, I go back and end up playing with it for like another, probably like 2-3 hours, and accomplishing basically nothing. To the point that whenever we finally get to the end, which is coming up here in any second, it will jump ahead and it'll probably look like a completely different drawing. Well, not a completely different drawing, but all the... Like, there's a bunch of, like, dark colors that are too low saturated in the image right now because I couldn't figure out the color balance on those. The facial features sort of changed. Some more shadows started appearing. The weight of the line works... Yeah, there we go. The weight of the line work starts changing. It ends up looking a little bit better, but you can tell where my frustrations were coming from. Also changed the eyes up a little bit and all sorts of other things. That is the nature of this process for me. Like, this is where a lot of my frustrations come from. This is where a lot of my successes come from. Most of my strengths are in the primary stage, drafting things out, creating a lot of depth and weight to my line work, but once I start putting things on top of that, it starts creating more and more smaller problems. Especially since I am sort of obsessed with the idea of making things look not photorealistic, but I love the shading that other artists do in regards to making fine skin tones and making fine tones to their cloth and things like that. But I also really like cartoonish looking shading, so I'm always stuck in the middle. Which does give me some of my little personal identity when it comes to making things look the way that they do. Because as far as I know, no one really draws the way that I do. There are lots, especially like Japanese, Korean artists and things like that. They can get really industrial in terms of trying to replicate one another to the point that often you can't tell a lot of artists apart. Western artists can have the same issue, except then it's either they want to focus on things looking authentic to cartoons or looking authentic to more Eastern media that they're consuming. So a lot of them will have the exact same issue, especially since a lot of kids these days are learning digital, and they'll be very formulaic in their approach to that, focusing a lot on Control-Zing all their problems away rather than working with them. So as a result, they will also have the same sort of issues that lead them into developing styles that are also extremely clean and very lifeless. So, not many people draw the way that I do, but that's not necessarily a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that happens as a result of the process. And a lot of that comes down to your approach, how you think about how you're drawing, and so on. So, this is what this video is about. I hope you enjoyed my stream of consciousness in trying to assemble, which was probably a bad idea for the character. Taokaka, like, her design does not lend itself well to this, since I'm trying to take what is essentially an extremely generic geometric series of forms and make them into something that is more organic and has more realism while also not having realism. It's something that is like directly antithetical to how I draw in the first place, now that I think about it. But anyways, you got the idea. Hopefully my rambling made some degree of sense. I'm going to go back to not having any internet and maybe try to get another video done in the time it's going to take to get the internet back up to where I can even upload anything at all. Amazing! Alright. Thank you for joining me. Say goodbye, Taokaka. I don't even know if she can talk. I know nothing about you. You're hot, though.